UN Women in the framework of the UN Interagency Working Group on Gender and Disability Inclusion. So it's a pleasure to co-organize this event with UN Women. So this webinar is organized as we are getting closer to International Women's Day, but also, as you may know, of the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. I believe this event, Beijing 95, has meant a lot to women with disabilities. And just to start, to dive into the philosophy of Beijing 95 and what it meant for women with disabilities, I would like to say a quote. We came here because we are women. We came here to expose our abilities. We came here to share our experiences. We came here to strengthen networking among women with disabilities and other women. We came here to make ourselves visible. Now we are living with our expectations partly met. We have made some impact. We have made people aware of us. We have socialized and gained contacts all over the world. But we are aware that there is a lot more work that needs to be done before we achieve our basic goal of equality with all women in general in our respective countries. Watch out, women with disabilities are on the move. This quote is taken from the research paper conducted by the International Disability Alliance, which is called From Beijing to the CRPD, the missing keystone. And I think this quote is a good idea, is a good one to show what Beijing 95 meant for women with disabilities. It was a very important conference which was going to shape the world's future in terms of women's rights. And it was just not possible, it was not an option for women with disabilities to not participate and to not have their voices heard. But the problem was that some parts of the conference were built without foreseeing the participation of women with disabilities. And there are many stories that are, I think, told very well in this research paper, which I encourage each one of you to read. We know that it was quite a big struggle for some women with disabilities to meaningfully participate in this conference. There were inaccessibility issues, and we know, for example, of some leaders with disabilities who couldn't enter some of the conference rooms and who had to stay in front outside to wait for the delegations to be able to talk to them and to advocate. And also there were luckily a big wave of solidarity, people carrying out assistive devices for others, acting as support persons spontaneously, and many stories like this one. And I would like to say that for those women with disabilities, they really had a lasting impact on women's rights worldwide, and not only on of course, on both on mainstream women's rights, but also on women with disabilities rights. And this contribution is really important, is really valued, and that's something we want to recognize today. And what could be better to do that than to hear from somebody who has actively taken part into the process, because this conference was important, but it also led after to the draft of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, with the standalone article number 6 on women with disabilities. And as someone who was just born when the Beijing 95 happened, I can only wonder, you know, how did that happen? And how did this alumni, these great leaders of Beijing 95 paved the way for the next generations in terms of women's rights? And we are really pleased today to have with us Gertrude Oforiwa Fefoame, the chairperson of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's really a honor, Gertrude, to have you with us. And I would like to ask you today if you could tell us a little bit more about this story and some of the words that you would like to address, going from Beijing 95 to the CRPD and up to today, and whatever you would like to share. Over to you, Gertrude.
Thank you, moderator. Greetings, all friends, all protocol observed. It is a pleasure to join you today at this ILO webinar on employment of women with disabilities, which is being held as part of the celebration of International Women's Day, year 2025. As was said, I'm Gertrude Oforiwa Fefoame, but I am the immediate past chair of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I joyfully handed over on Monday, and the chairperson of the Working Group on Women and Girls with Disabilities. So here I extend my sincere appreciation to the ILO Disability team for convening this critical discussion. You might have thought that International Women's Day is a moment to reflect on the progress we have made. But in fact, we must also confront the realities that persist. Women with disabilities, we face some of the greatest barriers to economic independence, not because of the lack of talents, ambition, or skills, but because of deep-rooted societal perceptions, systemic discriminations, and workplace exclusions. Across the world, where disabilities are, among others, seen as unfit to meet workplace expectations, leading to hiring discriminations. 2, facing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination based on gender and disability, but also on race, class, trafficking, and other identity factors. 3, more exposed to violence and harassment at the workplace, often with little access to legal remedies or support. 4, pushed into informal work and the economic precarity with limited access to social protection, fair wages, and leadership opportunities. These are not isolated challenges. They are part of a larger pattern of exclusion that denies women with disabilities to fundamental rights to decent work and economic participation. The challenge we are discussing today, colleagues, they are not new, nor are they without legal frameworks to address them. We acknowledge that treaty bodies and special procedures such as the CRPD Committee, CEDAW, ILO, and other UN mechanisms play a critical role in advancing rights and holding government accountable. ILO, I salute you, because you in particular has spearheaded key initiatives to promote the employment of persons with disabilities. So for example, I just mentioned one quickly, the Global Business and Disability Network, GBDN, which seeks to work to promote disability inclusion by engaging employers, civil society, and other stakeholders in ensuring that there are inclusive workplaces, and this is important. If I come home to my CRPD committee, through Article 6 and the general comment 3, face unique and intersecting forms of discrimination that requires specific policy attention, and the extent gender-based violence and abuse they face requires effective documentation and redress. This issue was also highlighted by the Special Rapporteur on Disability at the 24th Alliance Conference on Trafficking, where she addressed vulnerabilities linked to human trafficking and disabilities. Another area is women migrants. Women migrants with disabilities remain invisible and ignored. Thus, they experience denial of their right to work. 27, thank you, ILO, you worked on this with us. And general comments, 8, further reinforce the obligation of state parties to the CRPD committee to create inclusive labor markets and eliminate employment discrimination. I wish to spend a minute and specifically talk about paragraph 56, which among others, quotes state parties are bound by the obligation to respect the rights of women with disabilities and young persons with disabilities to have access to just and favorable conditions of work, and thus are required to take measures to combat multiple intersecting discrimination and to achieve equal opportunity for promotion and equal remuneration of work of equal value. Quote closes. Yet, despite this commitment, implementation remains weak. Discriminatory labor practices exist. Workplace accommodation are often denied, and women with disabilities remain largely left out in employment policy discussions. So this is where it is important for us that international advocacy, legal mechanisms, and civil society continue to engage becomes very crucial. The RPD committee, we have long alongside other human rights Americans push stronger anti-discrimination frameworks that explicitly recognize disability-based employment barriers. We have held and continue to hold government accountable for their commitment under the CRPD and other treaties. And we encourage the collection of segregated data to ensure evidence-based policy responses and advocacy. As we mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, I reflect on my own journey, Beijing 1995. It was one of the first international events I attended in my advocacy work. And it was there, unfortunately, that I saw for the first time how women with disabilities were often invisible in broader gender equality discussions. That experience shaped my commitment to this work. That's why we are here together. Because all that was said in introductory remarks were true, and we had to force and make ourselves visible. One of the remarkable things I remember is that through our action and reaction, the tent, which was far away when we come up from our buses, was brought closer. And many more we needed to work on. So we fought for disability inclusion in the global gender equality initiatives. But now, 30 years later, I must ask, have we truly lived up to those commitments? Despite the progress made, women with disabilities remain among the most excluded in the labor market. The promises of Beijing and the commitment through the CRPD must be translated into real action, because equality cannot wait any longer, not 1, 2, or 30 years. Today's webinar, therefore, is highly important, an opportunity to examine these challenges in depth. As we engage in these discussions, let us remember the following. Disability rights are women's rights. And women's rights must include women with disabilities. Employment discrimination is not just an economic issue, it is a human rights violation. Accountability matters, and legal frameworks exist, but they must be enforced. On this point, I can thank the ILO Disability Committee again for convening this discussion, and I say thank you. Thank you once more.
Thank you very much, Gertrude, for this very Paul's speech. I hope I am heard well. Thank you, Gertrude. It was a really powerful speech, and you have really contributed to visibilize one of the most marginalized group, and you made the very interesting linkages with the current world of work and some of the ILO's most important areas of work as well. And we are really, really honored and privileged and proud to having you with us. Thank you so much. And I believe now it's time to start with our panel for today. We have a panel of four amazing experts, women with disabilities mostly, who will share some of their areas of work was related to the employment of women with disabilities. So there will be 4 questions and 2 rounds of 4 questions. So I want to start now with the first panelist. I will introduce Amanda McRae. She's a disabled feminist, human rights advocate based in New York City. She joined Women Enabled International in 2016. She's leading the organization's advocacy work at the UN and beyond. Since graduating from law school in 2009, Amanda has continuously worked to advance gender and disability rights globally, including as a global advocacy advisor at the Center for Reproductive Rights and as a fellow and researcher focusing on disability rights at Human Rights Watch. So Amanda, we just listened to the chairperson of the CRPD committee, powerfully highlighting the importance of the Beijing 1995 conference to pave the way for a global movement of women with disabilities. As someone leading the advocacy work of a global organization of women with disabilities, after introducing Women Enabled International, I would like to know if you could please walk us through the main outcomes of this momentum that you may notice in your daily work.
Thanks, Guler, and thanks to ILO for organizing this event and including us in it. It's great to have this conversation on such an important day like today. So I'm from Women Enabled International, which is the first and still only global organization of feminists with disabilities and allies working to advance rights at the global level at the intersection of gender and disability. We do this through advocacy, which is the work I lead with human rights bodies, with states, with movements, and others to ensure that the issues and priorities of women, girls, and gender diverse people with disabilities are reflected in agendas. And we also do this through strengthening movements of feminists with disabilities and through staying abreast of the issues in the world that are most impacting our rights and our well-being as women, girls, and gender diverse people with disabilities as well. So reflecting on Beijing and what the outcomes of that process have been, I think one really positive outcome for women with disabilities around the world has been that we have found each other and worked in solidarity within our movement of women with disabilities and feminists with disabilities to advance our rights. So since Beijing 30 years ago, for instance, you see many more organizations led by women with disabilities forming and influencing policy and agendas throughout the world and throughout their communities. This has in turn led to laws, policies, and practices that are more inclusive of them at all levels as well, which means that our rights are being seen and heard more. In addition to that, there's been really steady progress for all women, but including women with disabilities in participation in public and political life. So you see women leaders now broadly in many countries around the world and at the global level. And you almost always now see that gender is on the agenda in important discussions, not just ones that are very obviously gender issues, but on the important issues that affect us in our daily lives broadly, things from climate change to women, peace, and security, and beyond. And right now, we also see that the leadership of women with disabilities in particular at the global level is incredibly prominent, which is so exciting. So we have Gertrude here, who is the now former chair of the CRPD committee, but really leading the way on disability rights globally as a woman with a disability. And similarly, her colleague Ana Pelez from the CEDAW committee, really leading the way for women's rights globally as a woman with a disability as well. The Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as one of the high-level members of UN Women, is also leading our way globally to advance these rights. And it's an exciting moment for that leadership. And then finally, we've seen a lot of progress on issues that impact women with disabilities as well, including on labor and employment, where women, including women with disabilities, now have many more choices about their participation in labor and employment. And this has led to them having more economic independence to make choices about their lives more broadly. But I just want to note that there has been this progress, but whenever there's progress in a movement, and whenever that progress makes big societal change, there's often backlash too. And we are in a moment right now of really significant backlash against gender in the world. Gender equality and human rights backlash, I think, right now is at its peak, although it's been building for a number of years. In global spaces and in many national spaces too, gender has become a taboo word, a word you shouldn't be saying, something that shouldn't be included on the agenda explicitly. States that were often friendly to women's rights and gender equality are now shying away from the topic explicitly and telling organizations like ours, we just need to wait this out and see what happens. It's a really discouraging moment. And when things like gender become controversial, more nuanced topics like intersectionality, a topic that is so important to us as women with disabilities who live at this intersection of gender and disability, fall off the agenda entirely. And so do our issues in the gender equality movement, like legal capacity, accessibility, the right to live in the community, all issues that the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recently highlighted in her report are issues that we as women with disabilities need to see more progress on within the gender equality movement. And I want to provide an example of what's happening right now that kind of illustrates this backlash in a way that's really discouraging for us as women with disabilities. In a few weeks, there's going to be a global disability summit where the rights of people with disabilities will be discussed and highlighted, and where there'll be a chance to really advance those rights. We're excited about this summit, but gender is not on the agenda there. We've heard from the organizers that it's a concept that has been mainstreamed throughout the summit, but you've really got to go looking for it to find it. We hope that in the next month we'll see some progress in that regard, but to me it's really a reflection of how there's this gender backlash right now and where we still need to make progress to advance gender equality, including for women with disabilities. So I'll leave it there, and I'm excited to hear from the other speakers today.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for walking us through your work areas, but also for highlighting this hard moment of backlash that we are witnessing right now on women's rights. And we also totally heard that intersectionality is an important part of your work, and something also we'll be talking about today quite a lot. And before diving more into the topic of employment, we wanted to also highlight some of the ILO statistics that are not necessarily very positive, but could serve as a basis for advocacy, and also to show that there is really something to be done with regard to the employment conditions of women with disabilities. As we know, there are 4 on 10 people without disabilities are currently outside the labor market, and this number is almost doubled for persons with disabilities, proportionally speaking, because we have 7 on 10 people with disabilities who are outside the labor market. What we also see with this data, which is available on ILO stats and can be used and consulted by everybody, is that in 60 countries with available data, we see that women with disabilities have a much higher rate of inactivity than women without disabilities, but also than men with disabilities. And when we have said that, did we say a lot? Not really, because we all know that it's not just about numbers. Even if we would have equal numbers of persons with disabilities and women with disabilities in the world of work than other people, it still may not indicate equality of conditions, because there are many other topics that should be taken into account, and some of these topics we will explore them today. And that's why I would like to give the floor to our second panelist today, Dr. Jennifer Byrne, an Irish academic working on issues of gender and disability inclusion in the Global South. She has previously worked for a number of Irish and international NGOs and aims to strengthen inclusion in international development programs. She has a particular interest in the links between decent work and self-confidence at work for women with disabilities. So Jennifer, I understand that you conducted a research on the employment opportunities for women with disabilities in Rwanda and Cambodia. And I would like to know if you could share with us what are some similarities and differences related to societal perceptions, stigmas, and discriminations, and how does this affect the access of work for women with disabilities?
Thank you very much, Guller, and thank you very much to the ILO and to UN Women for hosting me here today. It's really an honor to join you all here and to share with you some of the findings from my recent research. So as you mentioned, Guller, I conducted research in both Cambodia and Rwanda to understand the overall societal perceptions of women with disabilities in these countries, and to understand how this influences the access to opportunities and to work that women with disabilities have in both of these contexts. So to begin with, while it may not look on the surface like women with disabilities in both Cambodia and Rwanda have a huge amount in common because they sit on different continents, what I found really is that there are a huge amount of similarities in the societal perceptions of women and of women with disabilities in both of these countries. So both countries have very strong religious beliefs, which influence a huge amount of the society in both countries and which also influence attitudes towards disability. I found that the Christian beliefs in Rwanda and the Buddhist beliefs in Cambodia have a huge impact on how people think about both the causes and impacts of disability in both countries. So what I was told in my interviews and with key informants was that both religions see disability as some sort of divine act and something that the person themselves has no control over. So under maybe the medical model of disability, both of these belief systems sort of emphasize pity and charity towards people with disabilities without really acknowledging independence and autonomy. And the other similarity that I found between both countries is that participants in both countries described regularly experiencing quite a lot of negative attitudes surrounding disability from those around them. And we found that discrimination often starts in the family, with a lot of women describing how their parents weren't interested in sending them to school because of their disabilities, meaning that they wouldn't be able to work later in life. This was sort of the broad cultural assumption around the capabilities of women with disabilities. And we also saw in both countries that there are huge misunderstandings about what it actually means to be a woman with a disability, where communities, local governments, ministers, educators don't really understand what it means to be a woman with disability and the capabilities of women with disabilities, which I suppose is also linked to a lack of representation at that level. So while there are many similarities between both countries, there were also many differences. And I must say, quite a few of the differences quite surprised me. So one of the main things I found is a difference in the levels of education and also employment for women with disabilities in both Cambodia and Rwanda. So in Rwanda, education levels are much higher for women with disabilities. So all of the participants that I spoke to have at least a basic level of education in Rwanda. Whereas in Cambodia, many of the participants had never been through formal education. They didn't have as much education as participants in Rwanda. And I think that's mostly due to the government initiatives which exist in Rwanda for education of all. And then the other surprising finding around that was that wages are actually 4 times higher in Cambodia for women with disabilities than they are in Rwanda. And this is most likely due to low barriers to entry in the textile industry in Cambodia, which is the biggest industry for women with disabilities there. The other difference that I found is that in Rwanda, we see much stronger gendered norms and patriarchal norms impacting the lives of women with disabilities. In Cambodia, these patriarchal norms certainly do still exist, but they tend to be lessened by the strength of families and communities. And the final difference that I would have found is that there's much more government involvement in the disability movement in Rwanda. I found a much more centralized sort of relationship between the government and organizations of people with disabilities in Rwanda, where the system of support is much more formalized. This is quite different in Cambodia, where the government is much less involved and support tends to be much more community orientated. So if we're asking what all of this means for decent work, I suppose, what I found in both countries is that functional capacity tends to be the biggest marker of decent work in both countries. So it sort of depends on what each society values in terms of work. And as well as this, the prevalence of the informal economy in both has a huge impact on the opportunities available to women with disabilities. As you mentioned previously, the informal economy is massive in both Cambodia and Rwanda, and it does most often tend to preclude women with disabilities from decent work. And I think the final point that I want to highlight really is that these attitudes towards disability that we see are culturally specific. They're different for me in Ireland to what I found in both Cambodia and Rwanda, and they're different in each localized context that we work in. So I would argue that initiatives for decent work need to account for these differences across countries and regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for speaking to some of the most areas of work of the ILO, and informal work and informal economy is actually a big part of our work. And it's true that in this informal economy, persons with disabilities tend to be overrepresented. And it was also very interesting what you shared about the different belief systems and how that can impact the way persons with disabilities are treated in their families, but also their education and also what they're encouraged to do later on or to not do at all. That's very interesting. And we will talk about this a bit later on as well. So thanks for sharing some of your findings with us. So I will introduce now our third panelist, Anu Lwapo Ameloi is an ILO consultant researching national policies focusing on workplace violence and harassment for persons with disabilities. She holds a master's degree in international and international development, and she is interested in social justice, education, and employment of individuals with disabilities. So Anu, I understand that you are currently conducting a research on the implementation of the ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment at work in 5 African countries which have ratified the convention. Those are Lesotho, Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, and Uganda. And we know that persons with disabilities face situations of violence and harassment that are similar to persons without disabilities. But in addition, I would like to know if there have been incidents that are specific to their disability status, and even in particular more specific to their gender status. Over to you, Anu.
Thank you, thank you, thank you thank you, the ILO, thank you, the UN, for organizing this panel session. It's nice. Happy International Women's Day to all women. So for these results, really, yes, we are researching, our research focuses on discussions, establishment of the ILO, so, perfect. We are researching, our research focuses on group discussions, focus group discussions about the ILO convention. It focuses on violence and harassment of people with disabilities. So now our research focuses on 5 countries, how the policies, those policies, they have similar policies, how they focus. Do they focus on people with disabilities? Are they aware of those policies? That is what our research focuses on in Lesotho, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Uganda, and in Rwanda. Yes, Rwanda. So there needs to be, our workers are aware about the policies they have when they face harassment. Those policies really specific about women? More particularly, do they face the deep challenges they experience? So we discussed about the mock, persons being mocked, being excluded, and not taken seriously at work as well. Sometimes excuse me, please. Capable, they're seen as not capable. Like sometimes employers see persons with disabilities as you're not capable of doing your work. And really, they're not really respected like other employees. They face violence, harassment at work. So now I'll talk about the economic violence and harassment. So for many women that in that focus group discussion, in my research, they are underpaid. Many of them are underpaid. They say, we don't see the need to pay you the same wages as other workers. It doesn't matter. If they have higher education status or have higher expertise, they don't see the need to pay them the same. And similarly, in my research, I found that there are a lot of similarities in the 5 different countries that my research focuses on. I see that many workers in formal settings, formal sectors, they face a lot of difficulties in promotion at work, That's economic violence. That's the first economic violence that affects them. It is already very difficult to be promoted at work, very difficult to get that promotion. They don't want to take them to high position responsibility. Those are the situations that we have. But for women with disabilities, it's the same. It's not the same for persons with disabilities at work. Persons with disabilities, other persons without disabilities are promoted, but for the persons with disabilities are not promoted. So that's what our discussions have been about. And the 5 countries is similar across the 5 countries. And that means that there's a lot of, they're taking advantage. There's a lot of them being taken advantage of in their workplaces. Also in informal sectors in South Africa, some persons discussed about informal sector. The informal sector. There's economic violence there in the informal sector as well. For instance, you see when they provide services, no matter how good they are, the services they provide, other people look down on them because they have a disability. They look down, they're looked down on, they are harassed. Really, so that harassment that they face, they experience that a lot because they are women with disabilities. On sexual violence and harassment, the research has seen a lot of similarities in the 5 different countries that I'm had focused group discussions with. In South Africa, Rwanda. South Africa and Rwanda are kind of similar. Disabilities. So they face a lot of sexual harassment at work. The results. Oh, so when they report to their boss and say, no, they can't help them, they'll report to the HR management, to a higher authority, and they say, no, we can't help you about this. Go to the higher ups of the company. That makes it very hard for them at their workplace. It's difficult to it's very difficult to believe them. They say, you're a person, you're a woman with disability. Who will look at you and want to flirt with you? Who will look at you and get attracted to you, and issues like that? There is no support for them. So that is one really major point. And in discussions with Uganda, many women with disabilities, they do not know how to even report, or where to report to, who to report to, and things like that. And that also really messes up that is also a big source of concern for them. So it's a similar situation with Nigeria, and in those 5 countries. You'll be surprised to note that in South Africa, they have laws, policies to protect people with disabilities. Yes, in the workplaces, South Africa has that policy. They have it, but for women with disabilities, people with disabilities don't know about those policies. They're like, oh no, I don't know, I'm not even aware. And that is really an exclusion, marginalization on its own. That women with disabilities face, persons with disabilities face, especially women with disabilities. And they get different experiences from other workers. They're like, what are you talking about? So these are the challenges faced by people with disabilities, especially women with disabilities. They are treated differently from other workers. And that is kind of marginalization. We need to continue working on that, continue considering and including that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu. I think your presentation complements the presentation of Jennifer before, and thank you for highlighting the fact that economical instability and economical violence, as well as violence and harassment, have disproportionate effects on women with disabilities. And that's also something we hear from your presentation, is that there is a lot of accountability with regard to case management. And that's why I would like to come back a bit later on to your presentation to know what we can do to better empower organizations of persons with disabilities and of women with disabilities to take part in the implementation of the convention. So thank you, Anu, and I will introduce now our first panelist. Uzomaka Asigbu is a gender and disability inclusion expert interested in advancing employment rights of women with disabilities. With a master's degree in women and gender studies, Uzo's work addresses multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination in the world of work. And Uzo has worked with international organizations, including the ILO and UN Women, to promote inclusive employment policies and strategies. Uzo's contribution to gender and disability inclusion has earned her an award, nomination at the 2023 award, Young Woman Award of Europe, and an award of Women's Empowerment and Gender from UN Women, from UN volunteers in Nigeria, So Uzo, I understand that you also conducted a very interesting research when you were working for the ILO, and you interviewed a number of women with lived experiences of intersecting forms of discrimination. And I would like to know if you could explain us what intersectional discrimination means in practice, especially for women with disabilities in recruitment processes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me well, yeah?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to the ILO and UN Women for organizing this and for having me. In commemoration of International Women's Day, like some Amanda mentioned, with the whole backlash that is happening for the word gender and women all over the world, I don't know how excited we should be for this celebration, but regardless, we move on. So specifically to your question, intersectional discrimination for women with disabilities or, persons with intersecting identities can manifest in various ways in recruitment processes, especially because of the fact that intersectional discrimination is when people who have various identities that could be used for this to discriminate against them, when these identities come together to cause discrimination for them. When it comes specifically to recruitment processes, one of the things I got one of the findings I got from my research is the one on stereotypical assumptions, and it's stereotypical assumptions in the fact that in certain places or certain recruitment processes, the people behind it, because we all know that behind every recruitment process, there are human beings there. The people behind it could have certain stereotypical assumptions about a person. It could be about gender. They could have certain stereotypical assumptions based on women, in the sense that they could believe that women do not need to be promoted in the workplace or do not need to work or do not need to have a higher pay. And then these same persons that are doing the recruitment process could also have another stereotypical assumption for persons with disabilities, where they believe that persons with disabilities may not be qualified to, do certain jobs or be promoted in certain areas. And when you combine these two assumptions together, it further causes more barrier for women with disabilities in the world of work, especially in recruitment processes. One specific example I got from my research finding was the one where one of the participants shared that they were not promoted for a particular job position that they were qualified for. They had previously been the assistant, and when the person that was leading stepped down, it was their rightful position to go move into that other person's position. But because their gender, they identify as female, their gender is female, they were denied that position, and somebody else was externally recruited, a man, to take up the position. And when this person objected, the person was told, oh, in this country, in our religion, we believe women shouldn't be taking the lead in these kind of things. We should allow the men to lead. And then this person specifically mentioned that they do not even affiliate with the religion that was being dictated to them. They are not a part of this religion, but the beliefs of this religion was being used to deny them opportunities based on their gender and based on the fact that they have a disability. So they were being denied. So these are how, stereotypical assumptions could manifest in recruitment processes for women with disabilities. Another way could be bias in assessment. In this particular regard, it could be one I've seen manifest is where there are certain criteria that are specified for recruitment. It could be having a master's degree or having a PhD or having proficiency in a certain language, right? When you put on these criteria without considering the context of the people outside of those that meet these criteria, you're creating more barriers and it could cause intersectional discrimination. Let's say, for example, in terms of education, most persons with disabilities face so much barriers in accessing education. I myself, as a woman with disabilities, I know how long it took me to complete my bachelor's degree and to complete my master's degree. There were so many barriers on the way. And at the end of the day, some persons with disabilities do not get the opportunity to access higher education apart from their bachelor's. If they manage to complete the bachelor's degree, maybe due to the barriers or due to how their government, they don't have access to educational funds and, stuff like that. And then when there are recruitment processes that have certain rigid and non-flexible criteria. Oh, you have to have a master's degree. I've seen this be reflected where there are certain positions, and I know people who are very qualified because they have the experience and the skills for that job, but then because they don't have a master's degree, they're being denied. And this is much more reflected for women with disabilities whose education, even for the fact that being educated is even a problem, because most families or most countries, most local contexts believe that women do not need to be overeducated. And if you have a disability, education is like you're looking for too much. Having the basics education is enough. You shouldn't extend more. And this thing could cause further barrier for women with disabilities. Something like language proficiency. When you state, oh, you should have a certain language proficiency for a certain job, when that job does not, specifically need that language to be completed. But then you're not looking into the fact that a person could come from a certain country or a certain part of the world where they do not have access to, the language that is needed, the extra language that is needed. But then this language that they don't have immediate access to learn is being used to deny them opportunities. Another way intersectional discrimination could also reflect in recruitment process. It's in terms of workplace accommodation or the lack of workplace accommodation, if I may say so, where women with disabilities, they need the basic reasonable accommodations that could be provided. But furthermore, women with disabilities could also need gender-specific accommodations, right? If you're providing, let's say, something like bathrooms, it's very hard to see where bathrooms are being made, bathrooms for persons with disabilities rather, are being made gender specific, right? Something like accessible lactation rooms or changing rooms for mothers and all that. Most times these rooms are being made in a way where non-disabled people are the ones, or people whose disability, let's say, let's use wheelchair for an example. Some of these rooms, gender specific rooms like changing rooms, could be made for people who do not use wheelchair. And then if you're a woman with disability who uses wheelchair and you need to go to these, you have a baby and then you need to go to these rooms, this could cause further barrier for you in the workplace. So these are some of the ways that the intersectional discrimination manifests in recruitment processes. And it is very important that if we're trying to be disability inclusive, if we're trying to be gender inclusive, we should, look at the main context, the specific and unique context that women with disabilities face in assessing employment and work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uzo, and thank you for this very, very concrete and practical presentation. I believe, like each time I listen to you and today as well, I feel you describe and my guess is that other people who are online and who have similar experiences, lived experiences of intersectional discrimination, may feel like, okay, this is exactly my story, or you told exactly what I feel every day, and it was really simple and concrete words, and that's really impressive, I would say, and generous from your side. And also for those who didn't know before exactly what intersectional discrimination meant, I also would guess that now they would have a better idea of that and how that can manifest in daily life and in the world of work and in recruitment processes. And so this is the end of the first round of questions, and we have a second round of questions for our panelists. In the meantime, I will encourage everybody to start asking your questions in the Q&A. We could answer them or by writing, and panelists can answer to you directly. And we will try to take some of those questions also at the end, depending on the time that will be remaining. As to the second round of questions, I would like to ask a question to Uzo, because we finished with you, and so now I'll start with you, Uzo. You mentioned intersectional discrimination, and you gave practical examples on how that was manifested in daily life. That's something we need to address. And when doing so, when addressing intersectional discriminations in the world of work, how can we do so without how can we do so by making sure that Western concepts and traditions do not take over local views, cultures, or traditions? Over to you, Uzo.
Okay, thank you. This is quite an important question, and it reminds me of one of the participants during my research who was really educating for me. The person in my interview or my interaction with the person was really educating for me, where I myself, at a point I had to realize that I could have some I don't know if I should call it bias, but I have some sort of beliefs in international context and international frameworks, which are good. But then most of the time, especially if we're working in this humanitarian sector, we tend to forget that local context should come into play in whatever it is that we are creating and whatever advocacy efforts that we are doing. And it is very, very important, especially for the fact that most humanitarian frameworks that are addressing intersectional discrimination, CRPD, CDAW, and all that, they are being designed at international levels where the common people or the people who experience these discriminations daily may not have access to be able to contribute or to share their views. So I think for us as people in the humanitarian sector, it's important that we where we include the sensitivity of the local people, we include the sensitivity context sensitivity, rather, if I'm putting it simply. And one of the ways to do that is a participatory approach. Participatory approach in the sense that anything that we're designing, any policy, any solution we're designing for intersectional discrimination, we should ensure that local communities and the marginalized people, like the main people, if you're doing something for women with disabilities, but then at the end of the day, the people who are designing it, the people at the table, the people leading it, do not have any idea of the experiences of women with disabilities. It doesn't, at the end of the day, it may not really reflect the issues of women with disabilities even after it's been designed. So it is important that the particular marginalized group that we're working with or we're providing solution for in this regard should participate, and their participation should be meaningful, should be valuable. It's not, I see so many times when participation is for picture purposes where, oh, you have to take a picture, you have to, I don't know, just claim, oh, these people attended, we're designing something for women with disabilities, and you do a picture of women with disabilities, but then they are not given the time to speak, then their values are not being included, so it's very important that we take on the participatory aspect. And one way we could do that is through consultation, meaningful consultation with marginalized groups who are facing these intersectional discriminations. Another way is also contextualizing global standards, right? Whatever global standards that we're doing. I remember one example in my research where the person was talking about I really don't want to mention the particular framework, but the person was talking about a certain framework that was developed in Geneva, and how when the framework is supposed to reflect on the issues of this person, but then when this person brings this framework to their local context to be able to use it to defend themselves, the person found out that the framework does not necessarily reflect their issues and all that. And it is very important that if we're designing global context, we should give rooms for adaptation so that at the end of the day, when the people who are being marginalized, when they get these frameworks and they want to use it at the local context, at their local level or their community level, they can be able to adapt the framework to suit whatever issues that they are having, so long that the issue aligns with the framework. Yeah. So another way is also bridging local and global knowledge. So many knowledge are being designed at the global level where, there could be sensitivity, there could be awareness creation, there could be education, and most of these things happen at the global places. It's very important that we bring them down to the local system. English, let's use English as an example. English is one of the most widely spoken language, and most knowledge are being produced in English, right? Let's try to give room, if we're talking about intersectional discrimination, let's try to give room or try to ensure that these knowledges that are being produced in English, for example, can be locally adapted in local languages, that people who face these things every day can access these languages. It's one thing to create global knowledge or global frameworks. Is another thing for the common man out there to be able to, or if you ask them a question, they're like, yeah, we know about this, we know about this. But during my research, I found out that many people who face intersectional discrimination do not know about the many existing global frameworks that we have, because these frameworks are not accessible to them in their language or in their local context. And then apart from their language, we could also try to use local systems of education to step down these knowledges to them so that they are aware of this. Then capacity building and awareness raising, it's very, very important, where there are people who are doing the design, there are people who have the main knowledge, but then empowering the leaders of the local communities, building their capacity to be able to step down these trainings, to be able to step down these contexts, is very, very important. So I think these are the ways we can ensure. There are so many, but I don't want to take up much of our time, but these are the few ways that we can ensure that when we're doing something, or when we're trying to address issues of intersectional discrimination, that the Western or the global, I don't want to just say Western, but the global context of it does not overshadow the local context, and people who actually face these discriminations are being considered in these preparations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uzo. You have highlighted some very interesting and important points on addressing intersectionalities through more decentralized approach, if I can say. And you highlighted a very important point that I would like to take on for our next speaker. You spoke about having a participatory approach. And this is really important. Like there are other points you said, but this one, I would like to take it and linking it to the implementation of Convention 190 for our next speaker, for Anu. I would like to know, Anu, because that's also something you raised a little earlier, that incidents that were affecting women with disabilities were not necessarily taken into account and considered. And I would like to know from you, Anu, if you could tell us how could we make sure that organizations of persons with disabilities would be better included to implement the ILO Convention 190.
Thank you, Uzo. You spoke perfectly well about what you said. We must make sure that if we're doing something, if we're doing some work, some advocacy, we must make sure that we include people with disabilities, include women with disabilities. I saw that Uzo said that is a very important point for women with disabilities. There are people who advocate. They must advocate and speak their own experiences. So if we want the ILO Convention 190, what it really means is to protect them. They must be there. We must be included. It must be an important part of that implementation, because they can't leave us out of the discussion. They can't. They must bring us into that discussion. So for organizations of persons with disabilities, these are the OPDs. Drafts. So when they're drafting workplace policies, those policies must focus on including women with disabilities. The policies must include women with disabilities, not just to bring them to discuss, no, but they must make sure that women are there. For instance, for the committee, this is an example, the work policy committee, the work policy board, The National Disability Committee? Yes. So women must be there. Women with disabilities must also be included because they must share their lived experiences. They must give their own contributions. That is an important part of the discussion. Another important thing to note from research, many women with disabilities do not know, are not aware of the ILO Convention 190. They're not aware. They don't even know that it exists. So they need to know about the ILO Convention 190, that is there to protect them. They need to be aware so that they can be included, so that implementation can really happen. We need to ensure that we have enough awareness advocacy. For instance, the sign language videos, in audio formats, maybe for people who are with visual impairments. I don't know how they do, but maybe with Braille, we can ensure that they have those resources available so they are aware that, and they have access to that. And we can provide legal training because they don't know their rights, maybe who to meet, who do we contact, who do we approach when we have these issues. Because for workplace violence and harassment, many of them do not know about the ILO provisions for that. So we need to do more awareness and advocacy programs to let them know their rights. And another thing that is, many of those people with disabilities find it difficult to report violence and harassment at their workplaces. It's very difficult for them because they're like, oh, who do I report to? They are scared. So organizations of persons with disabilities, maybe they can have safe spaces. They can provide safe spaces and ensure that they provide support for women with disabilities. Those organizations can bring all of them together to a safe space and bring them to discuss their ideas and how they can work on those issues. That is one really important thing. And when you look at research from the discussions that we've had, many of them do not have that kind of access. They do not have accessibility. They don't have the opportunities to be important and included in those implementation. And also, many report systems many reporting systems do not design, the designs are not accessible for organizations of persons with disabilities. They can ensure that they are really, really accessible. For instance, when it's in a informal sector, it's different from the formal sector. It's not easy. How do they report to the police? They don't even know who to report to. The police do not know sign language, so they don't know how to communicate. And that is something really important that we need to advocate for. We need to work on and include women with disabilities in things like that. And that is something that is really, really important, I must say. For persons with physical disabilities, in the research that I conducted, it shows that in their experiences, persons with physical disabilities are harassed continuously, constantly. But how do they go report to the police? On their wheelchairs, they can't go there. With their wheelchairs, they're only stairs, there are no ramps. And they feel that, oh, let's just leave it aside, we don't need to go. And there's also the issue of fear. So that is something that we need to consider. We need to ensure that policies for workplace, even on the broader scale, are inclusive of people with disabilities and women with disabilities. We say women with disabilities, why? Those policies are broad, very broad. So I want to thank you because it's women with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu, for highlighting some of these issues, but also for suggesting some of potential solutions which could be explored and advocated for. And I'm sure that all the colleagues and listeners on the line are well taking these points on board as also something also we need allies for. So thank you, Anu. I will now go back to our third speaker of this round, to Jennifer. Because, so Jennifer, in your research, you do speak about something that seems to be your main finding, that you call discrimination of women with disabilities. And that's something that drew my attention when I read your brief, and I was wondering, because this happens as a result of negative societal perceptions and bias, is it something that's similar to self-confidence or self-censorship, or is this self-discrimination issues, is it something more related to structural violence? And if you could explain that a little bit, and also if there would be some words that you would like to address to those women, we would like to listen to those words.
Thank you very much, Guller. And I must say also thank you so much to all of the other panelists and participants in this discussion. I really feel like I have already learned so much from each of you, and I can see the similarities and the synergies between the work that I've been doing as part of my PhD research for the last 4 years and the advances that we're making in other areas of the inclusion of women with disabilities in society. So it's really great to see. But to address your question, Guller, I think firstly, I would like to mention that self-discrimination is not a term that I made up, as far as I know anyway. It's something that participants in my study used over and over again to describe their situations in both countries. And I think I should note as well that in both Cambodia and Rwanda, English isn't a native language for most people, but self-discrimination was the term used in English. So I would argue that self-discrimination is a result of many factors, as you mentioned, including but not limited to a lack of self-confidence and this structural violence that you mentioned. And I would also like to mention as well that it very much links to Uzo's point and her work about the stereotypical assumptions that we have about women and about women with disabilities. So most participants used this phrase to describe how they wouldn't put themselves forward for things like opportunities in jobs, education, relationships, things like this, because they know in advance, or they believe in themselves, that they will not be chosen for these opportunities. So many participants described to me that they believe it's easier not to reach for something at all when they know that they will be rejected. And this kind of overall term refers to the perceived or real inability for women with disabilities to meet the standards set by society for able-bodied people. So this means, or I found that this means, that women with disabilities will self-discriminate from things like jobs and education because they know that even if they have the qualifications and experience necessary, that they won't be chosen for an opportunity over an able-bodied person. And I know this is something that other participants have spoken about as well. And what I've found is that this belief is very pervasive at the level of employers as well, where key informants in my research explained that if two candidates with the same experience and qualifications apply for a job, they will always choose the able-bodied person because it's cheaper and easier for the company. And while this isn't necessarily what we would like to hear as advocates in this sector, I think things like this are slow to change. And it's really symptomatic of the structural violence that you mentioned in the question, which means that women with disabilities are holding themselves back from opportunities because they think or know that they won't be selected. And I'm sure other participants in this panel, myself included, and maybe some of our participants in this webinar have experienced this sort of self-discrimination to different degrees. And I think it's very hard for me or anyone involved in this work to preach self-confidence when the odds are very much stacked against us. But I think it's really important to remember that all experiences are valuable in the right place. So in my research, this came up in the sense that someone who's blind in Rwanda, for example, mentioned that she struggles with IT and computer skills, but she thinks that she's perfectly well suited to customer service roles because she's very friendly and open and engaging. And the other thing I think that I should mention is that attitudes are changing. I know we've mentioned this being a particularly difficult time to speak about gender in particular, but as I've seen it in Cambodia and Rwanda and here in Ireland as well. I think employers and governments are beginning to see the value in the work of women with disabilities and are beginning to implement strategies more and more for decent work. So I think it's very important to keep advocating on these kind of platforms and to usher in change faster and faster. So thank you very much for having me, and I hope that we can continue to push forward and advocate for our rights together.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And again, I think I really think if there are women with disabilities on the line, and I'm sure a lot of them would feel that you're directly speaking to their lived experiences, and your research is really interesting. I would, if there is a link that you could share, or how people on the line could access to your research, I think we all would be really interested to read it entirely. So and thank you also for those words that you addressed to women with disabilities and to everybody today. I have a last question. We'll go for Amanda. Just before that, I just wanted to say that we'll maybe try to take some questions after this. We also will hear from our colleagues from UN Women. So I don't know if Montreal Career is online, but if I believe so, and if so, I wanted to check with my colleagues Stefan and Arya if there is a way that we can give the floor to Montreal after this last question, because I don't know if they would have a panelist link. So but now let's turn to the last question for Amanda. Amanda, we heard today a lot of specific issues faced by women with disabilities, and not only about these issues, but also issues to make ourselves heard a little bit more. We heard about violence and harassment, lack of decent work opportunities, intersectional discrimination, and indeed there could be many, many more topics that we could have raised today, including the care economy, the green economy, and the climate change, which Gertrude raised actually at the beginning, and many more topics, and artificial intelligence and how that relates to the world of work and the future of women with disabilities. There could be many more topics, and this means we will have to have more webinars. But my question for you, Amanda, would be to know, because women with disabilities are facing specific issues with regard to these questions, what would be some of the recommendations that you could give to advance understanding of these issues among mainstream feminist spaces?
Thanks, Guler. I want to highlight kind of two examples that can serve as guiding forces for how feminist movements and gender equality spaces can be including women, girls, and gender diverse people with disabilities in a meaningful way. Recently, in response to the exclusion of women with disabilities from gender equality spaces in many instances, a group of feminists with disabilities came together to create a document called the Feminist Accessibility Protocol. It's a call to action for all gender equality actors to ensure that the spaces they convene, where they're discussing important issues and making decisions about gender equality, are inclusive of and accessible to women with disabilities, and proactively seek to include them and address the barriers that they have to inclusion. It's a document we asked gender equality actors to sign on to, and so far we have nearly 300 signatories to that document. The document has also really helped inform two recent global gender equality conferences, the Women Deliver Conference and the AWID Forum, which just occurred last year, which brought gender equality actors from all sectors together to discuss these issues, and where accessibility and inclusivity of feminists with disabilities was high on the priority list in the agenda. And so that would be one thing I would encourage everyone to take a look at if you're not familiar with it. And I'm going to see if I can put it in the chat right now so that you can all take a look at it. I also want to highlight how this kind of inclusion of women with disabilities in these conversations has an impact at the national level too. I'm privileged to work with a number of colleagues from Nigeria, many of whom are actually in the room right now, which I was not expecting. But when I first started working with some of them in 2016 and 2017, they were operating in a framework under a gender equality policy that basically ignored their existence, and did not even acknowledge that women with disabilities were part of the gender equality conversation. And through their dedicated advocacy, and they're taking advantage of a government and a ministry that was open to their participation, they helped shape a new gender equality policy that includes really important elements like decent work and employment and education, but also reflects their priorities and values, was a result of their close consultation in the process, and will, if implemented, have a really profound impact on the lives of all women and girls with disabilities in Nigeria. And kudos in particular to my colleague Patience, who I saw in the room, but also to many of her sisters in Nigeria for that. So I know I highlighted earlier the gender backlash and how that's really impacting all of us at this moment, but it's really examples like these that made me think that backlash is really just a speed bump in our progress towards gender equality and not a brick wall. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you all in that destination, hopefully soon.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you for these concrete examples and for sharing the feminist accessibility protocol with people on the line. I believe it could be of a great help to everybody as a concrete way to advance inclusion of women with disabilities in mainstream feminist spaces. Thank you very much to all the speakers. And if we can, I would like to give the floor to Manjaro Kabir from UN Women for some closing remarks. I believe we may not have time to take questions. I also think that some of them would have been answered by the panelists, but let's see if we can hear some words from Manjaro Kabir from UN Women.
Thank you, Guler. Thank you very much, colleagues. And it has been a real eye-opening with listening to our extreme good panelists, all of them. And most of them we worked on in different part of our work together. And it has been also a pleasure to partner with you, Guler, on this and beyond, hopefully. Many of our UN Women colleagues have joined in today. We have also a number of other events planned, and we are observing next week CSW, along with the whole year-long Beijing Plus 30, as alluded to by many of colleagues. I just want to add a few comments as a way of reflection as I'm listening to our panelists and you, Guler, as well as many question and answer. I remember together with Women Enable International last year during COSP, UNCRPD, we spoke about the future of disability movement is feminist. And we are hoping that this year we can also able to speak that the future of gender movement is inclusive. Because that is extremely important that both movements and both movements on the ground can talk to each other, work together. A lot of the challenges and issues related to employment, as you're hearing, and I can really connect with them, are actually would be beneficial for both movements to come together if we want to solve them proactively. Now, I want to make it very clear that there has been a perverse assumption in the broader international community and also at the national level that often many countries view disability as some sort of monolithic, and there are diverse type of needs. That's number one. And that's linked to directly the employment issue, because often we are only feel complacent by creating accessibility in terms of building accessibility, but not necessarily changing the pattern of management, not necessarily changing the pattern of technology that we use, and also creating an enabling environment in the office spaces so that women and girls with disabilities find a better opportunity in terms of fully harnessing their potential. And that doesn't happen because often we are self-limiting ourselves in terms of our efforts and our initiatives. That's number one. Number two is we worked closely with our gender responsive team and many other team. working with how can our budget and finance become much more inclusive. And this is extremely important because often we don't talk about budget and financial allocation, and we must work with Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning to get better planning in terms of creating more inclusive policies, laws, and institutional framework, which might then harness the job and the growth for person and women with disabilities. And second point, I just want to highlight our panels did alluded to this in terms of issues of self-discrimination, not necessarily projecting own confidence. I understand, I get it. Those are all valid. But there is also a very, very rampant institutional bias. Recently, UN Women, together with other UN entities, did a study, 4 countries in Samoa, Palestine, Moldova, and Pakistan. And we have, from the data, we looked at the institutional bias, the presence of institutional bias as the moment you approach disability issues are quite high in not only on those countries, but it gives us a feeling that those type of data are present and prevalent in many societies from many continents. And I think we need to also factor this in public policy process. Then also looking at the issues of reasonable accommodation. I have also seen there is an element of lack of sensitivity around the aspect and arrangement for reasonable accommodation. And in many countries, many institutions had a budget for reasonable accommodation, but they don't fully use that reasonable accommodation and people don't know about it. And also there is no dedicated funding for it. And all these require a little more thought process in the planning process, not necessarily big game-changing money investment. And then last point I want to highlight, Guler, is on the whole need of accessibility. We are celebrating Beijing Plus 30 this year, and we will be publishing, of course, a knowledge compendium and a number of other initiatives throughout the year before UN General Assembly in September. We're looking into connection between UN CRPD and Beijing 30, as Gertrude mentioned at the beginning. But we are also looking at the accessibility is not only for persons with disabilities. We need to take a life cycle approach. Elder women, younger women, in an emergency situation, accessibility benefits everyone. So rather than only sticking accessibility for person with disabilities, while we are seeing accessibility is beneficial for everyone, let's take it much more universal approach, embrace it, and make sure that we created a much better space for both education and employment for women and girls with disabilities. Happy International Women's Day for tomorrow, everyone. Thank you very much. And we'll continue to partner with ILO and UN Women and many others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much, Vandril, for this powerful speech and closing remarks. I fully agree with you. And we will now end this webinar. It was a pleasure to moderate this. And on behalf of the ILO, thank you. Thank you, UN Women, also for sponsoring. Thank you to our excellent panelists, and also to Gertrude for doing the opening remarks. Thank you to the interpreters, and of course thank you to each one of you for participating. This could not happen without you. Thank you to Stefan and Arya for the technical support, and thank you really to everybody. We wish you a wonderful International Women's Day and anniversary of the Beijing 95 Declaration and Platform for Action. I really hope that the generation of Beijing 95 is proud to see what they have contributed to create, and today we had very good examples of that pivotal role. Thank you very much, and I wish that you all have a wonderful Friday and weekend, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.